Can you all hear me? Just type yes if you can. And so welcome everybody to the Fearless Flyer live webinar. Now, we'll be starting in a few moments. So my name is Lawrence Layton. I'm the host and therapist of the Fearless Flyer program. And we also have our senior EasyJet captain on hand to answer your questions. Say hello, Chris.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Hello there.
And we have Mark, who's the course director, and interestingly, a former phobic. Say hello to Mark.
Yes, good evening, everybody. It's Mark here.
And one last person to introduce, and that is Tim, who's my other fellow director of Fearless Flyer. And he actually used to run a major UK airline himself. Say hi, Tim.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Nice to be with you tonight.
So it's great to see so many people on this webinar today. And I won't say hello to everybody. There's too many of you to say hello to personally. But I'll just say one great big warm welcome to all of you. So tonight is your opportunity to ask the Fearless Fly team any questions about the course. So please start sending in your questions now. Just send them in continuously. Just keep going. We'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. So bear with us. We'll try to answer everybody's questions, but we'll do our best. So whether it's a technical aviation-based question or a question about the coping strategies used on the course, or any other question that's on your mind. But keep those questions rolling in, and as I say, we're going to try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. And look, we really want to give you the confidence in our course, and we hope by the end of this live webinar that you'll realize that you're not a lost cause, and that we can genuinely help you to become a fearless flyer, which will be totally life-changing for you. Now, we've successfully helped over 2,500 people to date. So just imagine, really imagine it, what would it mean for you to become a fearless flyer? And just imagine a life where you actually enjoy your holidays. Imagine being on a holiday totally relaxed about the journey home instead of dreading it 2 to 3 days before it's time to leave. Imagine how proud your family and friends will be when you become free from this horrible fear. It really would be life-changing. So let's start having a look at some of the questions that we've got here. We've got a question here from Lorraine, who says, what happens on the ground course? Well, basically, it's a 3-hour ground course. In the first half, I put everyone at ease and explain how your mind creates fear. And once you understand how you create fear, you actually can learn how to change it. Now, what's important to point out is there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. Fear is just a pattern of behavior that can be changed. Now, what people are most surprised about is that the course is a lot of fun. And there's some really funny moments, even though we're talking about a very serious topic. And everyone sits theatre style, and there's a proper stage and stage set. And people always comment on the way out that it was really an enjoyable evening as well as practical. And the point is, I believe if you're having fun, you absolutely learn more easily. Now, also in the first half, we've got our senior EasyJet pilot who goes through all the technical aspects of flying. In fact, I'm going to hand over to Chris on this one to tell you more about what he talked about in that first half.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My part of the course is really about the technical element. So I go through things like the sounds, the sensations you have from when you board the aircraft to when you disembark. We give you this information to give you this sort of really enhanced knowledge to know everything that's going on, and also just to prove that everything is normal. We've got some great sound effects, we've got some great audio visuals, and of course then we move on the following day to the experience flight, where I'm actually able to give you live commentary. I'm actually sitting in the cabin giving you commentary through the duration of the flight, so that by the time you finish the 2-day course, there won't be anything that you don't understand about the aircraft and the flight.
And thanks for that, Chris. In the second half, we're going to teach you a series of tried and tested coping techniques and strategies that will work on anything, no matter what it is. And in fact, you'll learn a set of life tools. I really do believe and tell people it's a set of life tools, because you'll be able to use these coping strategies in many other situations in your life that sort of might make you scared and anxious. And I can certainly tell you one thing, that you're going to leave the room empowered, inspired, and really ready for the experience flight the next day. Now, let's just take a look at the questions.
Lawrence, if I can just cut in, it's Mark here. Just looking further back, because we've got quite a lot of questions that have come in, but one of the earlier questions that's now disappeared probably off most people's screens is, why is it over 2 days? And probably that nicely picks up with what you and Chris were just talking about, and perhaps an opportunity for me as the ex-phobic here to try and express and explain why we have split the course over 2 days. Sometimes the initial view we get is, oh, great, but it's a bit inconvenient because I've got to come back on the second day. When I've actually taken the time to explain it to people, they then get it. So really good opportunity for me to do that now. And really it's born out of my own experience, because when I had my phobia, and it was a long time ago, but when I had it, the last thing I could think about was getting on a plane. So for us, what we did is we've looked at the course to say, okay, let's split it over 2 days. Principally, we want you focused entirely on the ground course on day one. We don't want you thinking about a flight. We know that if you think there's a flight at the end of it, it's going to make you anxious, and you're not going to be able to relax enough to take on board what's being told to you by Chris in terms of everything about the aircraft, or by Lawrence in terms of learning the techniques, and then taking those techniques away and learning them. So the principle is that we want you to focus on the ground course on day one, and then day two we want you to make the decision to come back and fly. We're not going to use any peer pressure. We're not going to march you straight from a classroom over to the plane, and it's actually very empowering for you, because when you do that, the next time you take a flight by yourself, you'll actually recall that you made a decision to come and fly, not that we got you to the plane, because otherwise you're going to think, yeah, well and good, they got me on the plane, but what happens the next time I fly? So the reason we split it over 2 days is, one, you can focus on the ground course more thoroughly and in a more relaxed fashion, and number two, because when you then take the flight, you've made a conscious decision to come back to the airport. That was you, and that's what happens. And in fact, we had a course at Gatwick over the weekend, and a hugely successful course, as they always are. And again, everybody came back to fly the next day. It was a great result, and tears of happiness and joy getting off the plane at the end, and people now booking holidays and being able to go away for their work. So it really does work over a 2-day format. Sorry, Lawrence, I thought it was a good opportunity just to pick up on that question.
No, that's absolutely, that's fine. Andrew says, why do you think fear of flying is so common? Well, I think that the media have a tendency to amplify any situation that happens in the air, and there's been a lot of television shows, air crash investigation, and I think that a lot of people, especially phobics, weirdly enough, get hooked on these shows. And of course, that they start playing these negative mind movies of these kind of situations, which then fuels the fear. So I think it's a combination, Andrew, of many different reasons why people, why it's so common. But it certainly is a common. I think, if I'm right, 1 in 6 people, or possibly that I have seen some stats recently that sort of like 1 in 4 people have a fear of flying. And obviously, look, some people just will fly, but they fly with what they call a Valium sandwich, or they get sort of pretty much blind drunk to get on the flight. Some people just won't sort of fly. They've never flown. In fact, the people that have never flown in their lives, they're actually the easiest, because it's actually more the fear of the unknown. And once they come on the course and understand, how a plane flies, and the noises and the sensations, there's no fear of the unknown. And after that, they all say the same thing to me. They go, "What was all the fuss about?" That's the one sentence that I hear over and over again from the people that have never flown before in their lives, and they come on and they go, "What was all the fuss about?" So I hope that answers your question, Andrew. Let's have a look at some other. Kerry, I've flown for years, but after having a panic attack on a plane, I know I suffer with severe sickness before enjoying flying. Will the course help me with this? Kerry, absolutely, yes, it will. we have many people who have the same situation where they suffer from panic attacks. And in fact, during the second half, I teach you a really fantastic breathing technique specifically designed for panic attacks. And every single person that I've talked it to have managed to control their panic attacks using it. So we can absolutely help you, Kerry. Let's have a look at some other questions. Oh, there's so many questions coming in. Let's have a look.
Hazel just asked, do you get to ask questions on the ground course, Lawrence? So probably a good opportunity just to explain the format of the ground course there, which is once we start, and Chris, the first section, as Lawrence said earlier, is Chris is doing his, basically taking you through the aircraft, so everything you need to know about the plane in broad terms. We don't want you to be a pilot at the end of the session, and as Chris will tell you, and that's half the point here, it takes many years to become a pilot, and you need lots of experience, but we need you to understand the basics, the fundamentals of a plane. How it flies, how it stays in the air, why it's not just going to drop out the sky, how physics keeps it up there, why the shape of the wing has a major bearing on that, what happens if there were a problem, and what redundancies are in place to help the pilot. So all of that comes about in the first half. And then from there, there's often, to be fair, there's often going to be questions that we haven't answered. Some people have specific concerns. We sometimes get, about a mobile phone being left on. And in fact, I'll let Chris maybe pick on that up in a second. But because that sometimes happens, what we do is we have an open Q&A session, so we'll be there with microphones. Once we've done our structured Q&A, which are the regular questions we get asked, can a wing fall off, how does the wheel come down, how does it fly? Once we get through that section, we will then go through an open Q&A, and you get a chance to ask Chris, or if it's not Chris presenting, one of our other pilots who will be presenting, you get a chance to ask them a question. And even then, if there's not enough time, or people need a comfort break, in the interval, the captain's there to take more questions. He's there at the end of the course. And of course on the next day, because Chris is there, or one of his colleagues will be there in the cabin with us, so as well as having a full crew on the flight, we then have the extra captain, the presenting captain. So last weekend it was Chris who presented on the afternoon. On Saturday on the flight he was in the cabin with us, and he's giving a running commentary, or gave a running commentary of everything that went on during that flight, so that there's no stone left unturned, there's no noise that you don't understand, there's no ping that you think is a secret code, because that doesn't happen anyway. So every noise, every sensation, every shape that the wing will make, for instance, all the clunks and noises you hear on a plane will be fully explained to you. So in answer to that question from Hazel, basically there's an open Q&A section, but even then you get a chance to speak to the captains anyway.
Okay, Jackie says, scared of flying, but especially over water. Been on a few flying courses before, but still scared. Family going to New York next year, but can't bring myself to go. So, Chris, I think that the main sort of question here is about flying over water. So, Chris, perhaps you can kind of come in and answer this question.
Yes, Jackie. I mean, the best thing to say to you is go ahead and book that flight, because actually, you can't limit yourself, and what you're doing is you're putting undue stress on yourself by limiting your opportunities here. This course works for thousands, and it really, really does work. But I mean, the specific question you're talking about is having confidence in the aircraft. Aircraft are incredibly well manufactured now. They're well designed. They're incredibly well maintained, and of course, as a result of that, they are incredibly reliable. I mean, the probability of anything untoward happening, actually most pilots will not have any sort of significant event during their entire flying career, and that's perfectly normal. Having said that, if something does happen, the preparation we go through, the training we go through, every 6 months we are in the simulator to be checked under a microscope, if you like, for 8 hours every 6 months to make sure that we've got exactly the right standards we need to meet. It's testing and it's training all rolled into one, just to make sure that all the high standards are maintained throughout. So you've got a combination of incredibly reliable aircraft, you've got fantastic crew training. The maintenance that the aircraft has to go through is very prescriptive. It's not like it's not like what you do with your car. You take it for an MOT once a year. Maintenance on an aircraft is really significant. Major maintenance will take an aircraft out of service for 3 or 4 weeks while they do significant checks on the aircraft. So just to give you an appreciation, there are an awful lot of measures in place specifically to ensure that that flying is safe. And crossing the Atlantic is not a problem at all. There are hundreds of flights a day that are going backwards and forwards across the Atlantic. It's perfectly routine. It's very well structured. The air traffic control across the Atlantic is absolutely first class. Everything is very well organized, and aircraft nowadays can actually travel over water. Some aircraft, as you might know, have twin engines. They have extended twin engine operations across the Atlantic. They have some different rules on those aircraft, and they have four-engine aircraft going across the Atlantic as well. But whether it's a twin engine aircraft or a four-engine aircraft, it's certainly not a problem. So go ahead, book that flight, and then, well, I can only heartily recommend you come on the course, and then we'll get you to the point where you need to be to take that flight to New York in absolute confidence.
Thanks. And while you're sort of answering, we've got a question here from Leslie. I worry about security, particularly now some airlines allow the use of mobile phones on planes. Unfortunately, I've watched the action movies and they've reinforced my fear. So if you could, Chris, just kind of, your views on the security.
Yes, well, I was going to mention that because Mark mentioned that previously. I mean, security is of absolute paramount importance. It goes without saying. And I think if anybody's been through an airport recently, you've got to have an appreciation for how many barriers there are in place to prevent any unlawful activities in the first instance. The way you go through security, you take your laptops out, you take your belts off, you sometimes have to take your shoes off, all these sorts of things. I mean, compare traveling, if you like, compare traveling, I don't know, perhaps on a train or a bus, just to realise, the measures that are in place to ensure that flying remains safe. And the other thing, of course, is it's not easy to get into an airport. It's certainly impossible to get through to an airside area to get access to an aircraft unless you've got special clearance, security clearance to do that, with various background checks and 5 years worth of history and all this sort of thing. So really that sort of risk, once again you're creating a problem that doesn't really exist. The second part of the question, just to come on to, because it's come up a couple of times already with a couple of people, is this business with mobile phones. And it's a really good question, because actually you probably noticed that over the years, initially mobile phones were absolutely forbidden. You had to turn off electronic devices for takeoff and for landing. And then over the last 6 months, well, you might notice that actually regulations have been relaxed. That's due to the fact that aircraft shielding in terms of electrical systems are so much more resilient now than they were years ago, and they've got so much more confidence in electrical interference that it's really not a problem. So as far as that's concerned, you might notice now that when you do fly, if you want to listen to music during takeoff and landing with your iPod, providing it's in flight safe mode, you're allowed to do that now. So that's quite comforting if you're an anxious traveller.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think Mark.
Sorry, yeah, Lawrence, I just want to pick up a point. I think it's further down again. I've just got to go back to it. I think it was Jill's question. And I'm now searching through all the... Here we go, Jill. Jill was saying that even though she may come on the course on Friday, she knows she'll still be very anxious on Saturday. How does she cope? It's an interesting point, Jill. I think it typifies a lot of the conversations I have with people on the phone about how they visualize how they're going to be on the flight without building into that concept the fact that they've had 3 hours with us on the ground course. So the way you have to deal with this, and it's a strategy I give most people when I talk to them on the phone, if that concerns them, is you need to really just think about the ground course. I mean, bear in mind, no one's going to make you fly the next day. That's the important thing. But to suggest you're going to be stressed already is, I understand that because I've been there, and I know that at the point I had my phobia, I didn't believe it was curable. So I always said, well, yeah, you can tell me what you want, but when I get on the plane, it's not going to help. The reality is, the ground course does change the way you think. You are going to have 3 hours. You're going to have the half of it with Chris going through, or actually it won't be Chris this weekend. It's Pete, one of Chris's colleagues, but just as good as Chris. We're going to be going through all the aircraft with you, so you'll know everything there is to know about the aircraft. Don't forget, in the second half, you're going to get the coping techniques from Lawrence. You're going to be in a very different place, and I use the analogy of taking an exam. And if I said to you, you've got to take an exam, i.e. get on the plane, if we use the two as a sort of similar example, and said you've got to do that the next day, but you have no knowledge, we're not going to teach you anything before you take your exam, you're going to go into the exam room totally devoid of any information and think, what do I do? I've got nothing, I don't know, I'm going to panic. We're going to give you all the knowledge you need to go and take that test. So Stop trying to visualize yourself on the plane the next day and just visualize yourself on the ground course and let us do the rest. Because I guarantee you, you're going to come out very different to how you go in. Because whatever happens, we're going to give you 3 hours of knowledge that no one can then take away from you. And I don't know if you get our regular emails, but I used one the other day where I sort of used the analogy of the world being flat against the world being round. And if we all thought the world was flat, we'd all be petrified to go to the end, to basically sail out to the horizon, because we'd be fearful we'd drop off the end. But once we know it's round, we can't be scared anymore, because we know we're not going to fall off the end, and we'll just keep sailing round until we come back to where we started from. So it's the same principle with our course. Once we give you the knowledge, you're going to know what everything is, so the things that are worrying you shouldn't worry you. So as I say, the trick is, don't visualize yourself on the plane, visualize yourself on the ground course, let us do the work on the ground course that would change the way you think the next day. We had a lady yesterday come off the plane. She was not dissimilar to you. She left the ground course saying, oh, okay, well, that was good, but I don't know how I'm going to feel tomorrow. She turned up at the queue the next morning. She said, I'm a changed woman. You've done something, you've changed something. I've woken up this morning, I'm ready to fly. I can't believe it. She was ecstatic. So I think you've just got to try and think about it in that way. Sorry, Lawrence, back to you.
And that happens so many times that, you know, we get the situation where people come the next day and something happens to them overnight and they feel completely differently about it. Caroline, I watch the cabin crew's faces constantly to see if their expression changes. If they're not smiling, I fear that something must be wrong and immediately panic, so much so that my husband has to ask to speak to one of the cabin staff so that I can be reassured. I feel so stupid. Well, first of all, really don't feel stupid. Fear is a terrible thing to go through, and you know, there's no reason for you to feel like that. We talk a lot on the course about people who fill in the gaps, and this is why I really feel that you know, I can help you, because you know, you are essentially filling in the gaps. You know, people do it with, you know, they hear the chime of the call bell, and suddenly that means something terrible. They see the cabin crew face, and they will put their own meaning to it, and it just doesn't mean that. You're essentially filling in the gaps, and the mind has a tendency, it automatically has a tendency to fill in the gaps. And the point is, people get scared because they play mind movies in their head. You know, and it's like of the worst case scenario. They also say negative things to themselves in their internal dialogue. In other words, their self-talk. So, in other words, they see the worst case scenario of the plane crashing or exploding. And look, the point is, if you play that inside your head over and over again, then who wouldn't be scared? You know, you're going to create your fear. They also focus their minds in the wrong way. The point is, the mind can't process negatives, because doesn't exist in the unconscious brain. I'm going to prove it to everybody right now. Don't think about an elephant. Of course, what does everybody do is you think about an elephant. So if you're saying things like, you know, I don't want to die, I don't want to panic, right? Take down out of the equation, and what are you focusing on? You know, you're focusing on panic, you're focusing on dying, and of course that's going to make you more and more scared. So I teach the same techniques that I showed on my Channel 4 TV show, which allow people to change what they focus on and helps them to delete their negative mind movies that they play inside of their heads, replace them with positive ones. This is not about positive thinking, okay? This is not just, oh, look, you've got to think positive. You know, these are very specific techniques that will change how your brain stores and perceives information, so that the intensity is taken away, and that fear is going to be, you know, completely deleted. They're very, very powerful techniques. So hope that answers your question. Interestingly, we ran a poll because, look, fear can be made up of many different aspects. For some people, it's the fear of heights. For some people, it's the fear of enclosed spaces. For some people, it's the fear of being out of control. There's obviously multiple other aspects that it could be: fear of turbulence, fear of having a panic attack. But they're the three main ones. And interestingly, we get this on the course. We ask this live in the room, and it's exactly the same here. Your biggest fear, 52% of people have a fear of being out of control. So it's interesting. It follows the same pattern over and over again. Keep your questions coming in. It's really great.
Lawrence, there's been a question from young Reese, I think. He says he's 14 years old, and he was asking about stopping panic attacks on the plane. And I think that seems to be a common theme here. So it might just be worth picking up from you just on panic attacks particularly. And
Yeah, absolutely. Look, well, panic attacks, obviously, for the person having a panic attack, they're of course not very pleasant, but they can be controlled. And the first part of changing your state of mind is actually your breathing. Your breathing plays a massive part. When people are anxious, people actually breathe in the wrong place. They're breathing from the upper part of the abdomen, and we were never designed or born to be, breathing from the upper part of our abdomen. And so when we start the process of having a panic attack, we're breathing in the wrong place. If you were to, sort of watch a baby when they're first born breathe, they're breathing from their belly. Now, to get yourself out of a panic attack, there is a fantastic technique, which I mentioned before, that I teach on the course, which absolutely takes you out of that panic state and into a much more relaxed state just by learning how to breathe effectively. I think anyone that suffers from panic attack, I think the main thing is it's the fear of having a panic attack, and you fuel the panic attack, because if you've had a panic attack before, I think the main thing is that you're embarrassed, and it's the fear of, oh my God, am I going to embarrass myself again on that plane in front of everybody and have a panic attack? And because you've got that constant fear and worry and anxiety about will it happen again, that's actually the one thing that will create it and make it happen again. So on the course, I'm going to teach you techniques to stop you from going down that old pattern, to literally break that old cycle, break that old pattern of cycling around, oh my God, am I going to have a panic attack, or just focusing on the wrong thing, I don't want to have a panic attack, which the same thing will cause a panic attack. I'll be teaching you how to change that old pattern, but on top of that, I'll teach you a technique that will stop a panic attack in its tracks. Every single person that I've taught this technique to have controlled their panic attack using the technique without, a fail. You will be able to control. Now, knowing that you will be able to control a panic attack, that's empowering. Because if you know you can control it, you're in control, which means you're not worrying about it. And believe me, it has worked on every. So we have never had a person on the experienced flight have a full-blown panic attack. They've been anxious, they've started, and we've taught them technique. They've managed to get themselves out of it. It just has never happened. You're in great company. You've got a team of experts. So you'll be taught the technique on the ground course. You'll have that ammunition when you're on the plane. The whole team's on there with you. It's never happened, and it won't happen to you. So I hope that the guys answers your questions on panic attacks. I do totally understand where you're coming from, but I know that I can absolutely stop you from having a panic attack. Keep the questions rolling in.
Lawrence, I'm going to pick up on we seem to get a common theme on turbulence, and because that was my fear many years ago, I sort of relate to that one more than any other fear within the fear of flying spectrum, but turbulence for me was definitely the thing that triggered it for me. So talking from my perspective, and I'm going to bring Chris in a minute just to sort of help, but it's something we do cover on the course. Turbulence for me reminded me of where I was and made me feel very unsafe because I didn't trust the aircraft. So what we do on the course, it's very much about trying to educate you about how robust the aircrafts are, that they're built to fly through things that maybe we as humans feel uncomfortable doing, but the aircraft itself is never in danger. They're not allowed, and Chris will back me up on this, but the pilots aren't allowed to fly through conditions that wouldn't be safe for the aircraft. So I get the turbulence point, and it is something that we focus on, and actually on the course itself we use a lot of visual aids to actually explain turbulence and to show you why it's not dissimilar to a bumpy road. But Chris, if you want to just pick up on this, I know it's difficult to sort of try and do it just verbally, and we use a lot of AV, but obviously it might be something you want to just pick up on.
No, it is, and it's a significant question. We get it all the time, just in terms of meeting people when they're flying on flights. On any flight, typically there is somebody or a group of people on the aircraft that actually you can see their faces change when you go through a few little lumps and bumps. I mean, as Mark's already picked up on, the most important thing in terms of the simplest message is in fact this. and that is that the perception that you have, or the feeling that you have when you're sat in your seat, is really greatly amplified. I mean, if you were to look outside, or if you get the opportunity to look outside the window, even when you are going through what you believe to be bumpy weather, you'll see that the aircraft's moving around just a very little bit, really. But if you were to close your eyes, for example, during that turbulence, instead of looking out of the window, all of a sudden your mind, we've talked about this before, but your mind fills in those gaps, and you probably think you're in a washing machine or in a tumble dryer being sort of tumbled round and thrown around. But I mean, what I would say to you, if you think about turbulence and don't like turbulence, it's all to do with your body as a human is really best adjusted to being on the ground in what's called 1G, one level of gravity, and essentially that's what humans are good at. That's what they're designed for. That's their comfort zone. Now, when you're in an aircraft, of course, there'll be little adjustments to that, and you can get a slight increase or decrease in aircraft altitude. And once again, you often get a little dropping sensation, and the perception is, once again with this, is that you think, oh my goodness, the aircraft's dropping. Well, it can't physically drop. It can't physically drop because physics doesn't allow it to happen. If you picture a golf ball, perhaps, golf balls being driven off the tee with a great big wood, and it goes 350 yards down the fairway. And if you look at that golf ball, its forward velocity is phenomenal. It's going at such a rate, and you will see it occasionally in the wind. You'll see the golf ball flight path just adjust a little bit, and that's what you're getting in an aircraft. So there's so much inertia to an aircraft that it doesn't allow it to do that. But this is something, I mean, the turbulence question for me is one of the most important questions because it comes up time after time on regular flights. It's the greatest concern, probably followed only by, secondly by, I think, the takeoff, because that's a high volume phase of flight that people want to know about. So we spend an awful lot of time on the turbulence question, and when it comes to the open question and answers, when it comes to having my time or one of my colleagues' time during the course, we open the floor to this question, and we will go through this question in minutiae detail so that you know that it's perfectly safe for the aircraft. And myself, I mean, I can sit in turbulence for hours and in because I know it's perfectly safe for the aircraft. I mean, it's not necessarily pleasurable sitting there, but then if you think about it, if you drive down a bumpy road, you don't particularly enjoy that either. And they're very similar. The difference being, of course, with bumpy roads, you can see the undulations, you can see the potholes. With air, you can't necessarily see things. The other thing, if that's a difficult thing to visualize, is think about air as a liquid. Think about water. It's exactly the same. If you see a choppy sea, you see boats being moved around on the swell in the sea. It's exactly the same. You can visualize that much more clearly because it's something you can see as opposed to air that you can't see. Having said that, of course, with turbulence, the charts we get from the Met Office, that when we report for work, they're incredibly high definition charts. The detail on the charts is very good. Reporting of turbulence is especially good between pilots, because if we're in an area where there's light turbulence, we'll report it to air traffic control. Air traffic control then have a responsibility to actually let the aircraft that are following us know that actually there's been turbulence reported at this level, which allows people behind us to either climb to a higher level if that's possible, or to go to a lower level to see if they can find some smoother air. So there's an awful lot of information available to pilots to avoid bad weather in the first place. But once again, just to reassure you, I mean, we could sit in hours and hours and hours of terms. It's not a problem for the aircraft. Not necessarily comfortable, but it's certainly perfectly safe.
Jackie says, can't see me ever getting on a plane not thinking that something bad is going to happen, no matter how many times I'm told it's safe. And she also says in another message, scared of getting on a flight to New York and still being anxious. 8 hours is a long time. Jackie, I understand you can't see yourself at the moment because you've spent, probably years focusing on the negative, and that your negative mind movie is of the worst case scenario. So if it's like imagine going to the cinema and it's like the worst movie that you've ever seen, and you decide to go back every day and watch that movie. I mean, no one would do that. That seems kind of not a logical thing to do. But kind of that's exactly what you're doing in your mind. You know, you're repeating the same bad movie over and over again. And that's why you can't see yourself relaxed on a plane, calm on a plane. But, you know, the good news is that, you know, I will teach you techniques where, you know, not just positive thinking, I'll teach you specific techniques where you will be able to take those negative mind movies that you're playing inside of your head, and you'll be able to change those by using some very specific sort of strategies, and you'll learn how to play a positive movie, not just positive thinking. I'm talking about at an unconscious level where, you know, change has to happen, and, you know, before, you know, not too long, you'll be able to see yourself on that plane calm and relaxed. And once you start seeing yourself on the plane calm and relaxed, if you can do it, that, you know, for 5 minutes, you can do it for 10 minutes. If you can do it for 10 minutes, you can do it for an hour. If you can do it for an hour, you can do it for 8 hours. And there are many different techniques that I can teach you that will help you. So I totally understand it might not be the technical side, but it's just that your anxiety levels. Well, anxiety is something that can be controlled by modifying, you know, certain patterns that you've got running inside of your brain. And, you know, look, imagine your brain is like a computer. You know, you've got hardware, you've got software, and the software, you know, that you're running, so, you know, is corrupted. It's like, you know, when a computer gets a virus. So you're running certain patterns in your brain, and, you know, you've got corrupted files. So think of it like that, as that analogy, if that helps. And really what I'm going to teach you to do is to be able to change the actual software. So there's nothing wrong with the hardware. You know, the computer's fine, your brain is fine, you're not broken, there's nothing wrong with you. But there's certainly the patterns that you're running in your brain, yes, then they've got a virus. So what I need to do is to show you how to, you know, clean up those sort of virus files, and to change those patterns with, you know, new and productive, logical and empowering patterns. And you know, once you've done that, then you'll start to see things in a whole new way, in a completely different way. So Jackie, I hope that helps. Keep your questions come rolling in. I did ran a poll, which was, do you have a fear of turbulence? And 79%. If I end the poll, you should be able to see this shortly. But 79% of people here have a fear of turbulence. So look, no surprise there. We absolutely know that. Again, you know, we give an amazing technical explanation of turbulence on the course, but also turbulence is all about filling in the gaps yet again, and we keep going back time and time again, you know, to talk about filling in the gaps. So any kind of sudden movement, then, you know, you then put a meaning, you assign a meaning to it that's negative, and of course that then just fuels the fear.
Lawrence, I've got a question in from Lorraine earlier on. She said, I've never flown, very nervous, will the course help me? So I just think, just for Lorraine's sake, the answer is absolutely yes. We get a fair number of first-time flyers, and their fear is simply the unknown. They've never done it before, they don't know what to experience or what the experience will be like. And obviously they're going to go through the same ground course and techniques that our regular flyers or people that have stopped flying go through. But whether you've never flown, whether you fly regularly, whether you stopped flying many years ago or stopped flying recently, and actually I would say that pretty much covers everybody that comes on the course, for whatever reason they may have stopped, for whatever reason they're not comfortable doing it but they have to do it for work, or if they've never flown before, it will help everybody. The difference obviously with the people that haven't flown before is they don't know what to expect. But I can tell you that every single person who's never flown before always gets off the plane and says, why did I wait so long? And they've realized it's been a real missed opportunity. They've sort of been scared of something for no reason except the unknown, and actually when they come and do it, their biggest regret is that they didn't do it earlier. So all I can say to anyone that's never flown before is really it's never too late to fly. It opens up a world of opportunity, but more importantly, we've never had anybody come off the course who's never flown who hasn't enjoyed it. They actually love it. They quite like the views. They realise that the sensations are nowhere near as great as they thought they were going to be, that actually when they sit through turbulence and they're doing it for the first time or any form of movement, they do realise it's no greater than you'd get in a car. So interestingly, for people that haven't flown before, it's always a very, very positive outcome and more of a regret that they've waited so long to try it. There was another one, actually, another question, Lawrence, I wanted to pick up on, which was how long will the techniques last if you're an irregular...
From Andrew, will the techniques last if you're an irregular flyer 1 to 3 times per year? Really great question, Andrew. That absolutely will last. As I said, the techniques really are a set of life tools. They're absolutely designed for fear of flying, but you can apply them to anything. And the point is that once you learn how to change and reframe how your brain is processing these things and storing this information, once that has been changed, then it's changed. So absolutely, we've had certainly people that have told us that years later that they're still flying. In fact, on our Facebook site, it's amazing. People post loads of photos with their sort of recent destinations, proudly with their certificates. So we certainly know years after taking the course that they're still flying around the globe, enjoying their holidays and having a great time. So Andrew, the answer to the question is they're absolutely 100% will last. So it doesn't matter whether you're a regular or irregular flyer, but they will last. I hope that answers your question. Let's have a look at some of the... Right.
So Catherine's asked a question here. And Catherine asks, I'm afraid of flying at night. So Catherine, just to reassure you, flying at night is not a problem. We've got so many instruments and aids available to the pilots. We obviously use the autopilot. The instrumentation alone is enough to safely guide the aircraft from the departure airport to the destination airport. Most modern aircraft also have something called auto-land, which is a capability where the aircraft can simply land fully automatically without the pilots doing anything at all. And these jet fleets are certainly capable of landing without the pilots seeing anything at all. So pretty much all weathers you can fly in terms of visibility. So that takes care of fog, and of course flying at night's not a problem either. So that's just to close that one off. It's really not a problem at all.
Now Vicky says, if someone is quite severely anxious, would you recommend they go through more CBT before attempting this? I'm assuming attempting the course. Vicky, everybody that comes on our course is severely anxious, and you will not sort of be the only one. I mean, I think the one thing that's great about doing the course en masse is that people think that they're the only ones with this fear, that that their fear is in some way special, that no one else could be as bad as them. And when they come on the course and they see 100 people there that all think like them, all feel like them, there's an amazing kind of sense of camaraderie. There's an amazing feeling in the room, which I think the group dynamic certainly helps. But to answer your question, do you need to do some CBT before attempting the course? No, not at all. You're on the ground course, you'll have all the techniques that you'll need to be able to conquer your fear for good. So hope that answers that question. Jill says, how much practice do you need before you can do the techniques easily? The way I've structured the techniques, they're really, really easy to learn. And you will need to practice them, but you can practice them if you come on the course. We have either a Saturday sort of daytime course or a Friday evening course. You can practice them after the ground course. That is why we do the course. I know this has been mentioned before. We do the ground course on a different day because we want you to concentrate during the actual ground course. We want to make sure that you take in all the techniques properly, and also you have time to go home and practice them. But you'll go home and practice them before the flight. You can practice them on the morning of the flight. And as I said, we have over a 95% success rate. So we know that formula absolutely works for pretty much most people. Let's see. Okay, so we've got a question here. How many people come on the course? Tim, let's hand you over to Tim. We haven't heard from Tim yet.
Hi, good evening again, everyone. Well, a lot of people are concerned that they're going to be coming into a seminar-type room with maybe only 10 or 15 people, and that they'll feel strange, possibly even abnormal because of their fear of flying. And we want to reassure you that this is a fear that affects many, many people. And on each course, we get between 80 and 100 people joining the ground course. And about a third of those people, so let's say between 25 and 30, will then bring a companion on the flight with them, on the experience flight with them, which they can do for a small additional charge. So when we take to the skies on the experience flight, there'll be about 120 people on the flight. We very deliberately don't fill the plane to its maximum capacity, so that people with claustrophobia don't have that extra anxiety to worry about. But the room is set out in theatre style. It's very informal, and as I say, you'll be with a large group of like-minded people who many people during the course of the ground course and the time at the airport the following day will bond with each other, will make new friends and share their experiences of their fear of flying. So altogether, there's a great atmosphere during both the days, and you should be able to get on that plane in a far, far more relaxed frame of mind than you ever thought was possible.
Thanks, Tim. A question from Lorraine. How long is the test flight? We call it experience flight, but we get the general idea. It's between 45 minutes, roughly 45 minutes to an hour, just depending on the route that we take and what air traffic control, how busy it is, but around about 45 minutes to an hour. I think Chris wants to pick up on Tracy. There's Tracy's question. The BA flight recently at Las Vegas that makes me feel so panic-stricken, especially as I'm due to fly this week. Chris, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, certainly, Tracy. I mean, it's a really good point. And of course, when something happens like that, it's in the headlines of all the papers and it makes hugely dramatic photographs. But there are a few things that I'd just like to pick up from that. And it really goes back to what we talk about in terms of crew training and the crew being prepared. I mean, if anybody listened to the recording of the air traffic control from the pilot to the air traffic controllers, it was very calm, it was very cool, it was very orderly. All that's happened there simply to the pilots is them reverting back to their training, so rejecting the takeoff as they did. It was actually a very low speed takeoff where they abandoned the takeoff and realized they had the problem, brought the aircraft to a standstill, shut the engines down and evacuated the aircraft. So from a combination of certainly the pilot's perspective, very calm, very orderly, just falling back on the training that they've done over and over again. From the cabin crew perspective, obviously equally, if not more important, because they're fundamentally they're my eyes and ears as a captain. They're my eyes and ears in the cabin, but also to you, they're the people that are most important for you because they're primarily there for your safety. And what the BA crew did on this occasion was exactly what they've been trained to do: evacuate the aircraft very promptly, very quickly, within the 90 seconds, which is the requirement by the legislation. The only sad thing for me, just as a by-the-way comment, is that the number of people that were adamant they wanted to take their hand luggage with them down those slides was just unbelievably selfish, because if any one of those hand luggages or pieces of hand luggage had damaged one of those slides, then actually it would be a very different situation. So when you look at the training they've had from the pilots, the training that the cabin crew have had, absolutely fantastic. They've just gone back to exactly their procedures, and yes, a few people had to go to a visit with sprained ankles and minor injuries. But when you look at that aircraft's going to be a write-off. When you look at what happened to that aircraft and the condition it was in, it just goes to show that when you do fall back on the procedures that are well tried and tested, there's always a successful outcome. So Another question that came up, and it came up last week actually. We did our course on Saturday and Sunday at Gatwick, and of course one of the questions from the audience there, just to sort of to fill you in, was, well, what happens? Goodness me, what happens if that aircraft had actually got airborne? And actually, it would have been more of a non-event if the aircraft had got airborne, because we've got a decision speed on the takeoff. So if we have an engine failure beyond a certain speed, we take the problem airborne rather than to stop the takeoff or reject the takeoff. If we had taken that problem, if that aircraft had taken off and had that problem after takeoff, the fire that actually sort of surrounded the engine would actually have been a plume of fire that actually went rearward from the engine, well away from the aircraft. It was actually blown out quite quickly, because the only reason the fire was able to spread is because there was some liquid, which was fuel, that had actually fallen on the floor, and that was what was actually burning. If you can imagine that in flight, because the aircraft would be traveling at sort of a flying speed, so a good forward speed, that fuel would have been behind the aircraft, and therefore it would have, once the fuel valves were shut off, the fire would have been put out almost instantaneously. So in fact, the scenario that they had was the worst possible scenario, because, as I say, if it had been airborne, it would have been extinguished much more quickly. And then it's just essentially a large aircraft traveling or flying on one engine, which once again is something we routinely practice in the simulator. An aircraft like that can actually take off with one engine failing, even at the most critical point in the takeoff. And all commercial aircraft are actually designed in the same way in terms of certification. They all need to be able to take off, even if the engine should fail at the most critical point in the takeoff. So anyway, Tracy, I hope that helps reassure you. You know, once again, I totally understand where you're coming from. When you look at those photographs, you think, my goodness, it's a dramatic picture. But listen to that audio recording of the captain making his call to air traffic control. Listen to the tonality of his voice and how in control both he was of his own situational awareness, the situational awareness for air traffic control, and of course his awareness of what was going on in the cabin. He was in command of that aircraft very clearly, and everything seems to have been handled very well.
Thanks, Chris. Jill says, do you have any calming measures together on the plane? It feels better doing calming measures with others. Jill, absolutely we do, but also when everybody comes to check in on the day of the experience flight, the whole entire Fearless Flyer team is there, including myself. So, you know, I'm there. People obviously, if there is anybody that is slightly anxious in the queue, I'm there to calm and help out. But when everybody gets on the plane, apart from the amazing commentary given by the presenting pilot, I also do some you know, calming relaxation techniques with everybody on the plane. And it's amazing how quiet and calm the plane is at that point. I mean, it really is. In fact, all the dispatchers that come on sort of just before the plane takes off, they just cannot believe how calm and relaxed everybody is. They always kind of comment on that. So, Jill, the answer to that is absolutely yes. Oh, Lorraine says, I live in Liverpool. When is the next course? Tim?
Well, Lorraine, the next courses for Liverpool are on the 14th and 15th of November. That's a Saturday and Sunday course. Next week, we're in Manchester on the 19th and 20th, and then that's followed by Bristol on the 25th and 26th of September, Luton on the 3rd and 4th of October. We go over to Belfast on the 16th and 17th of October. Edinburgh is on the 31st of October and 1st of November. And then before Liverpool, we finish up in the London area in Stansted on the 7th and 8th of November. Somebody did ask if there was another Gatwick course. We've actually done our Gatwick course last weekend for this current season. Obviously, Luton and Stansted are potentially alternatives, but we will, of course, be back in Gatwick in the spring of next year. But if you'd like to take a course before the winter, then Stansted and Luton are still open and available.
Thanks for that, Tim. So, look, guys, I want to ask you all a question, because a lot of you have been on these sorts of webinars in the past, and you probably know what happens. A lot of times is you get all fired up and excited during the webinar, but what happens the next day? Well, probably nothing, and that's really a shame, because by now you should know that we can absolutely help you to overcome your fear. And the point is, old habits are hard to break. And the only way for you to be successful is for you to figure out a way to break that old habit. And the way you're going to break that old habit is by going on a professionally run course with a 95% success rate. And that's where you're going to learn all the tools that you need to break all those old habits so that you can become free from this fear forever. So look, you do have two choices. Choice number one, you take action and you come on the course. Or of course, choice number two is you can end this webinar, you go to bed tonight, and tomorrow you wake up and you're still crippled by this fear. Now, you have to decide what is the best choice for you, but I'm hoping that we've given you enough of a gentle push in the right direction so that you can take action. Now, with that in mind, we want to offer you an incentive. So if you book today, then we're going to give you 10% off the course. So I'm going to give you a code. You should see it by now in front of you. It's EZY10. And it gives you 10% off the full course price. So instead of 189, it will be 170.10, or with a companion 239.10. So this 10% offer, it's only available today as an incentive for coming on this webinar. So look, remember, you do have two options. Right now, you can book a course and turn your life around. Or number two is you come up with some excuse why you can't afford it, why now is not the right time, or you don't have the time to take the course. And look, whatever your excuse is today, just realize you'll always have the same excuse tomorrow, let's be honest. So, you know, what you need to learn is you need to learn how to ignore your excuses and make what you know is the right decision to invest in yourself and change your life forever. So to book, just go to www.fearlessflyer.easyjet.com, or you can click on that link on the right hand side that you see right now. So look, that's it for today. We really hope that we've been informative and helpful, and we really hope to see you at some point on one of the Fearless Flyer courses. So it's a very warm goodbye from me.
And it's a very warm... Sorry, we're talking over each other. It's Chris. Listen, thank you very much, everybody who's joined tonight. Really, I mean, for a pilot, this is a really emotional course. We see people on day one coming in anxious, nervous, full of all sorts of trepidation, and on day two, you know, waltz off the aircraft with a huge beaming smile and sometimes give you a kiss or a hug. It's really emotional. It's a fantastic result when you see that, and certainly it's probably one of the best parts of my job. So once again, thank you for joining us tonight, and we genuinely hope to see you on a course, hopefully in the not too distant future.
And I'll say goodbye. It's Mark here, and my final words are going to be, as I always say, as the ex-phobic, and I know how debilitating and how restrictive a fear of flying is, all I can say to you is really you need to do something about it. For me, I found I needed to learn. Certainly the people coming in our courses, they are flying because they're learning the technical and they're learning the psychological. So all I would say to you is, if you want to overcome your fear of flying, and you've got to want to do it, then get on a course, because it's going to be, to me, the one-stop solution to everything.
Okay, take care everybody, and we hope to see you soon.